it is particularly the genius of evil and of the devil to invert a situation and put the good person into an impossible situation where you are forced to either surrender or mimic the evil that has been visited on you. And when you do the natural thing, which is out of indignation, you strike back, then you are seen as the perpetrator. So then there's a swapping of positions in which the original perpetrator, in this case Hamas and the Palestinians, become the victims and Israel becomes the evildoer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Western Spirit. Today we have with us someone very special, Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh, for me, is someone who I've known about for a long time. I remember going to Dinesh's movies back when I was a kid. So Dinesh is a filmmaker and an author. His latest work is a documentary called The Dragon's Prophecy, which is about where we are right now sitting here in Israel. So Dinesh, it's a pleasure and honor to speak with you.
Thank you. I appreciate this and looking forward to our conversation.
So Dinesh, I was going to start the conversation from about a lot of other things, which I'll get to, but I just want to talk about something that I just saw on X/Twitter just now, which is you posted. Let's start this way. Tucker Carlson just had Nick Fuentes on his show, and you responded by posting what Charlie Kirk sent to you about Nick Fuentes. So maybe can you just explain to us the context of why you felt necessary to share with the world what he said to you and why it was important to you to do that?
A few months ago, I did a kind of a knockdown, drag-out debate against Nick Fuentes. And I did it because Nick was prancing around basically saying, I'm the alpha male. Everybody's scared of me. Ben Shapiro's scared of me. Charlie Kirk's scared of me. So I'm like, well, I'm not scared of you. So we had a debate focused really on the US strike on Iran, on radical Islam. I must say, Nick didn't come off all that well in the debate, and he admitted it. I'm glad I did it. But right after the debate, I got, some kind of irate text from Charlie Kirk basically saying, listen, it doesn't matter if you won. He goes, you don't want to platform this guy. He's bad news. He's vermin. And stay away from him. Don't amplify him. Don't amplify his message. And I responded to Charlie in a genial way, and I kind of set that to the side. But now I see, think about it. Tucker Carlson is headlining the TPUSA conference coming up in December. Tucker Carlson is in a way trying to make himself the face of TPUSA, Turning Point USA. He's sort of picking up the mantle from Charlie. He's basically saying, I'm going to carry the torch, in effect. And here's Tucker not even debating Nick Fuentes, but doing an absolutely sycophantic, kind of classic Tucker routine where he brings on guests of very dubious provenance and dubious character, but then he pretends to just ask them questions, even though they're delivering back to him what he already thinks. And then he pretends to be amazed by the sagacity and brilliance of these guests. I mean, we're all onto the routine, of course. But I thought it was particularly disgraceful to do it with a guy who not only praises Hitler, but in the latest interview, Nick Fuentes praises Stalin. He goes, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of Stalin. Now, what person kind of on the right has that view? And yet Tucker is like, that's interesting. That's very interesting. So here I am, and I'm like, I better just put this out there. I want people to know, and I want the Turning Point people to know that if this is the guy, Tucker Carlson, that you think is carrying on Charlie's legacy, it's not
Yeah.
exactly the case.
And I guess two things that just jumped out at me. I did not have the stomach to watch his interview, but two things that came out and are overarching themes that you speak about a lot. So the first thing that someone sent to me was what he said about Christian Zionists. And he said there that those are the people that he despises the most. Not Nick Fuentes. Tucker said this. He despises them, and the most, I assume, more than Islamists and more, because the most. That's what he said. And I guess, why do you think for that segment of the fringe, which Tucker represents, on that issue at least, why does it get them so angry that there are Christian Zionists? Why? There's lots of different people, different ideas, but this seems to really get them angry.
I think the reason it gets them angry is this. They would like to see a scenario where the only people in America who support Israel are Jews. because then it's easy for them to say that, the Jews are sticking together, the Jews are Israel first, they don't care about America, they have dual loyalty. That's an easy argument for them to make. It's dishonest, but it nevertheless is something they would like to be in a position to say that. But when you have mainstream Republican businessmen, evangelical entrepreneurs, Christians in general, all of whom say, listen, we have not only a strategic reason to support Israel, but a moral reason having to do with the anchors of Western civilization, and a biblical reason having to do with the very way we understand our own faith, this like drives the Tucker faction absolutely insane. And so this is their political goal, and that is to drive a wedge inside of Christianity. They're making it sound like they're engaging in some esoteric theological battle between what is called covenant theology and dispensational theology. But this is not in reality the case. What's really going on is they're attacking the mainstream of Christianity, which has always seen itself as a branch that grew out of a tree. The tree is the Hebrew scriptures or the Old Testament. The branch is the New Testament. And the New Testament, by the way, culturally is just as Jewish as the Old. And with the exception of one of the gospel writers, Luke, who was evidently a Gentile, everybody else in all the other books are written by Jews. So in some ways, you cannot remove the Jewishness out of Christianity. There's no way to do this. And yet, that's exactly the perverse theological escapade on which these malignant goofballs have set themselves on.
But I guess what to me I find fascinating as someone who grew up in the US and then moved to Israel at the age of 15. So I grew up, I said, watching some of your stuff. I came to visit my father, I watched a few of your movies. What I find interesting is that conservatives, especially since 9/11, were aware of the Islamist threat on the West. We spoke about it. It was on old talk radio. Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, those are the two guys that I grew up listening to, Mark Levin, all these people that were, even Tucker, if you look at his stuff back 5 years ago, even, this was a thing that was pretty much agreed upon, that it was the main, I guess, outside force threatening Western civilization, except for leftism, was the Islamists who were joining forces with the left. And now Tucker and his ilk, I use him because he's, I guess, the most famous one, but we have lots of his types. They are seeming to totally, not only do they not look at it, but they actively defend it, like Qatar and all these other countries. How do you explain the total shift in the narrative in their heads, I guess?
Well, let's start by just noting, let's look at the big picture. And that is that when I came to America as a teenager in the late 1970s, and then through the 80s, all the way through the Reagan era and the 90s, both parties were pretty pro-Israel. It was just a matter of how much pro-Israel. One is competing with the other to be more pro-Israel. Now, the Democratic Party, for reasons I think that we understand over the past quarter century, has allowed the anti-Israel, anti-Jewish virus to seep in. And part of it is because of the Red-Green Alliance, the alliance between the cultural left and the radical Muslims who have a common hatred for Israel and the Jews on the one hand, and for Christians and the principles of Western civilization and of America on the other. So this is why the Democrats have surrendered to that faction. Now, but it doesn't make any sense for this to happen on the right, does it? Because for anyone to drive a wedge between Jews and Christians, drive a wedge between America and Israel, try to undermine Christian support for Israel, all of this can only help the cultural left, and it can only help the radical jihadis. And that is exactly, in my opinion, what people like Tucker are doing. They're actually reinforcing the worst people in the world. In my film, I interview Netanyahu, and that's what he says. He says, don't these so-called MAGA people realize that they are undermining American interests and supporting the people who hate America the most, and the people who consider us, Israel, the small Satan, but you, America, the big Satan? So I think all of this is true. I must say, I don't feel like I've fully penetrated the motives of these guys. I know most of them quite well. Bannon, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Candace Owens, I've spoken at the Blexit events. I was part of a lecture tour last year in Australia with Tucker. So I've known Tucker over 30 years. And their motivations remain, to me, a little bit obscure. It's hard for me to believe like Tucker is just doing it for the money. Right? He's from a very wealthy family. He has the ability with his large following to monetize that and make a lot of money. He doesn't really need to have Qatar pay his electricity bill. So on the one hand, I'm not saying that Qatar is or isn't. I'm saying I don't think that can be a full explanation of what is really driving him. I suspect, as in the case when we're dealing with these deep rooted hatred, I mean, why single out Israel, right? A country the size of New Jersey. Why single out the Jews? I find that when you see that going on, and that is an obsession with Tucker. I mean, every issue now comes back to the Mossad. You know, here's Candace Owens investigating Charlie Kirk's murder, and what on earth does this have to do with Israel? But somehow, you know, a Mossad agent might have crawled through a pipe. So when you go down this route, I think that there is something very spiritually demonic going on here, something that transcends what you and I would call a natural or even a rational explanation.
Yeah, and Tucker, by the way, I don't know if I think he was serious saying that a demon hit him, basically in one of his shows not too long ago. Um, I do one thing that before I get to the other stuff about your trip to Israel and the movie and all that, I do want to talk to you because you are a conservative stalwart for so many years. What makes these people conservative at this point? It seems to me that there's a whole sort of branch of the right at this point in the US, especially, and a lot of like, I would say hitchhikers in Hebrew, you would term pistim, people who are latching onto the movement because it's winning. So you have all these, the brosphere, the brother, you know, the podcasts of these comedians that were leftists a second ago, but when Trump started winning, they all latched onto the MAGA train, who seem to think America is like the worst place in the world. This CIA is in charge of everything bad everywhere. Russia's this great country. They even have these amazing supermarkets and all this kind of thing. And there's nothing what makes people like that conservative at this point?
Well, I would say that Tucker and these guys emerged out of an environment in which global neoliberalism was sort of the architect of the world order. Remember all the phrases we heard about rules-based order, and it soon became apparent that the rules-based order was nothing more than a rationalization for certain elite groups in different countries to kind of control the levers of power. And the rules were not truly neutral rules applied to everybody. And this also became apparent in the United States domestically, where you'd hear phrases like, no one's above the law, which obviously I agree with. But this was being deployed almost Soviet style, where the idea was that you've got such a wide accordion of federal statutes that you can always find somebody who, and if you look into it, well, you can find something the guy did on his taxes, or if he's a doctor, you can accuse him of illegally administering pain medicine. So there are many different ways in which you can pretty much grab a guy off the street, and if you look into his background, you can charge him with 3 felonies. There was a book called 3 Felonies a Day, which kind of dramatically made this point. So I think what's happened is that all of this fueled a resistance a resistance that's particularly strong among young people. And remember, young people too have been emotionally and intellectually battered by the propaganda of political correctness in the schools and in the universities. So one of the things Turning Point did is it gave them a kind of off ramp. It gave them a way to say, no, I can go over here and hear a different point of view. And that was obviously, in a way, liberating. The problem is that when you become so intoxicated with that liberation that you now go to the other extreme. Now you think all conspiracy theories are true. And now you think that, you know, that if what happens now is that a Tucker comes along and tells you, listen, you have all these elites that you know about, and many of them have been lying to you at the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control, the NIH, the FBI, the deep state, the police state, and the media and Hollywood and the universities. So you've been getting all this diet of propaganda. So let me now tell you who holds the master keys to this conspiracy, and that's the Jews. And so these young people who have already they've already come halfway across this bridge are now being told that here is the way to come to go all the way across. And so, in a way, the most kind of diabolical idea is introduced not at the beginning, but at the end when people are very susceptible. They're looking for a Pied Piper, and then along comes Tucker to lead them off the precipice.
Yeah, and I would say that there's this James Lindsay is in Israel right now, and I just happened to see the whole thing of woke right. It's a grievance, sort of exactly what you said. It's sort of grievance politics where you're looking for where everything is wronging you, and you're trying to prove how wronged you are, and through that to make your political point. And that was, I guess, the opposite of what I grew up learning as conservatism: pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, being independent. So. Now I want to get to your to the movie. I saw a few interviews that you did about the movie, so I don't want to go over everything. But what I do think is interesting is you came to Israel, you went down south to the Gaza border, and I just was listening to one of the stories that you were telling about just remind me which one of the hostage families that you're speaking, and you're hearing the bombs going off right across the fence, and this was one of the hostage families.
Yeah, this is Lishai Miran, and her husband is Omri Miran, and they have two small children. And so, very interesting because we were our film production company in Israel set up this interview. So we go down to the Nahal Oz um, kibbutz, which is just a football or two football fields away from the Gaza border. So we can hear bombs and we can hear machine gun fire. It was very eerie because we did the interview standing out in the front yard, right in front of the actual kibbutz. And then as we're talking, and Lishai is talking about what happened to her, these guys, these Hamas terrorists come in through the window. She and her husband and the children are hiding in a safe room. They grab the neighbor's kid and put a gun to his head, and they make him knock on the door and say, if you don't open the door, they're going to shoot him. And so they use this kind of blackmail to make them open the door. Remarkably, as this is going on, my wife, who had been collecting this October 7 footage off of a Telegram channel where this Hamas footage was being deposited really day by day for over 2 years, my wife kind of realizes that we have the footage of what she's talking about. So, normally in a documentary film, you talk to someone and they describe events. And if you want to show them, you have to recreate them. You've got to get actors and give people a feeling of what it was like. But in our case, we didn't have to do that because we have the actual footage. And so it's actually quite a cinematic moment because she's talking and you see what she is talking about. This is the power of film. Most of my career, I've been an author, and in a book, you can tell people about something, but it's a whole different thing to put them right on the scene of the crime and have them see it for themselves.
And just to clarify, Hamas are the people who took the video on their GoPro of the actual events that she was saying, of the kidnapping and them trying to get into the safe room and all that. And they put it on. They basically published it. The terrorists themselves, right?
They live streamed it. And so the way our movie opens, it's kind of an interesting angle and different, let's say, than you would see in a typical horror film. So normally when you have a horror film, you see it from the perspective of the victim, right? A family is sitting around the table, they're peacefully having dinner, and then, psh, the window breaks. And so you're seeing it from the terrified perspective of the victim. Because of the footage that we had from Hamas, it's almost like I'm putting the viewer of the film on a motorcycle with the GoPro, and I'm saying, all right, you're going to be riding with Hamas across the fence into the kibbutzes. So it's a kind of unnerving, right? Because one is not used to seeing. The only people I know, by the way, who make these kinds of videos are serial killers, right? Serial killers will sometimes film their atrocities because they want to treasure them and save them. And you can almost look at one level at October 7th as a mass serial killer event. filmed by the perpetrators themselves. And the theme of our movie is, it's good and evil. That when we say the dragon's prophecy, who's the dragon? It's really the devil, the embodiment of evil. And so it's perfect to open with October 7, not only because very few people have seen that footage, but also because it kind of puts you face to face with evil and it makes you think in a way that Western people often don't about the true nature of evil.
When you were filming and editing and all this kind of thing, and you were looking at what happened on October 7th, and I guess what's more fascinating is the reaction to October 7th all over the world and especially in the West. What are your thoughts about how do you explain the reaction? So I guess the question is not what the reaction was because we all lived the reaction. It's not that long ago. It's 2 years ago. But we're perplexed. A lot of people cannot in Israel, especially me and others, especially Israelis that aren't fluent in Americana or in European. We look at it and we're like, how can this be that we were butchered and killed and kidnapped and everyone hates us? How do you explain it to us?
So I would explain it at the kind of basic level, and then I want to try to push it to a little bit of a deeper level. So the basic level is this. Number one, I think it was a big strategic mistake not to release the October 7th footage immediately because we live in a visual culture, and it's one thing to tell people about something, it's another thing to experience it. Right? If I were to tell you, hey, I grew up in India, this is the way my childhood was as a kid, you would have no good feeling about what that was like. But if I show you a video and say, hey, this is me at the age of 7, that's my mom, that's what we eat for breakfast, that's the vendor selling bananas out on the street, you'd be like, oh, wow, you've kind of put me there. And so I have a real feeling for what it's like. People never got a true feeling for October 7th in that way. That's number one. Number two, if Israel had carpet bombed Gaza on October 8th, I think the world would have to shut its mouth. Why? This is the simple theory that the punishment should immediately follow the offense. It's kind of like when a kid does something wrong, you got to punish them immediately. There's no such thing as punishing them 3 days later. There's too much distance from the original offense to the punishment. The two become disconnected, the one from the other. So these to me are the kind of, you could almost call it obvious or kind of more basic explanations. But there is a deeper explanation, and that I think is the one that the movie goes after, which is that it is particularly the genius of evil and of the devil to invert a situation and put the good person into an impossible situation where you are forced to either surrender or mimic the evil that has been visited on you. And when you do the natural thing, which is out of indignation, you strike back, then you are seen as the perpetrator. So then there's a swapping of positions in which the original perpetrator, in this case Hamas and the Palestinians, become the victims, and Israel becomes the evildoer. And of course, the propaganda is then all calibrated and deployed to support that narrative. So there are a number of factors involved here. This is the move of the dragon, if you will. This is the stratagem of the devil. But then you have to factor in there are 2 billion plus Muslims in the world. They have a lot of resources. Qatar doesn't just, pay a social media influencer $1,500. Qatar buys, entire political science departments and Hollywood studios. And so you can see the amplification machine is huge. And then you have the susceptibility and gullibility of the Western media. And then add to that this peculiar phenomenon of the anti-Israel, anti-Jewish right. And you can see the formidable forces that are arrayed against Israel in the situation.
So also another thing that we spoke about your years of being involved in politics and thought on the right. How do you, and you're from Reagan until now, basically, how do you look at President Trump's policy in the Mideast and his handling of the ceasefire and the way it's been going? How does that stack up, let's say, as a Reaganite conservative? Obviously you can't go one to one, but how do you look at it?
They're very different. I think that both figures, there are some larger similarities between them. They're both figures larger than life. They both are figures who define a whole era. I mean, you can talk about the Reagan era. You will, I think, over time, we will see this as a Trump era. Trump is like the Colossus, to use the phrase from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. He's like standing astride the world. And I think that's how he sees himself. He's like, he thinks he's the CEO of the world. Now, at some level, this is a comical posture to take. But part of the sort of ingenuity of Trump is that he has the kind of ability to make some of his most outlandish ideas into a reality, or at least a partial reality. I mean, I don't think that the left for one moment thought that Trump could actually get a ceasefire or figure out a way that the hostages would be returned. Now, there is a steep price that was paid, right? The return of all these terrorists back into, basically released back into the wilderness. So it's not cost free by any means. Trump is also a little bit, I would say, messianic in the way that Reagan is not. And what I mean by messianic is he will state goals for the future with such sublime confidence that no rational person can even really agree. Things like, we are now upon an endless vista of peace and prosperity for the Middle East. And he'll say this kind of in a sing-song, straight face. And, it's not just no Israeli. I mean, there's no American who goes, oh, I see it. Yes, absolutely right. We're just like, Trump will do this kind of stuff. I mean, Trump will say Gaza can be a Riviera. Now, I don't think it's because Trump like doesn't know that Hamas is Hamas. Hamas has evil intentions. Hamas has no intention of going away. I think he knows all these things. But I think what he's trying to do is kind of like, let's make some progress and lock it down. And then let's also create a framework in which we can draw in a number of these other powerful Muslim leaders. Because if we can do that, this is very much, of course, in the spirit of the Abraham Accords, then we are not engaged in a quote war against Islam, but rather we have powerful Muslims on our side going up against radical Islam. So I think a lot of what Trump is doing is in fact going in the right direction. But at the same time, I'm basically with Israel in saying that, we should not have any illusions. We have made a first step. There is absolutely a long way to go. And I do not for a moment agree with any claims by Trump or JD Vance or anyone else that somehow Gaza or Judea and Samaria are not part of Israel and should not be under the final authority and control of Israel.
Yes, and that's one thing that I really wanted to also ask you about. President Trump was interviewed in Time magazine about a week ago. He was asked about Israeli politicians pushing for annexation of Judea and Samaria, so-called West Bank, and he said pretty much exactly like this: that if it's not going to happen because they know that if it happens, all U.S. support would be cut off. And the question, and then J.D. Vance was here, and there was this bill that was pushed by the opposition pretty much and passed because they wanted to make Netanyahu look bad when Vance was here. But why? But I guess the question should be, why would this make Netanyahu look bad when Vance is here? Like, what is so angering? What is so against? Why does Trump and Vance? Why do they think it's such a bad thing that Israel would annex, let's say, Male Adumim, where there's pretty much no Arabs in the area? Why do they care? Or, for example, where I used to live in Efrat, in Gush Etzion, where there's almost no Arabs. What's the Why do they care so much, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think that this is a case of a philosophical disagreement. It is merely a prudential action. So let me put it this way. Let's say you move into Chicago, you want to clean up the gangs. And there's a whole bunch of gangs on the south side of Chicago. And you begin to move in the police and move in the National Guard, and you're trying to deal with that problem, and you're trying to basically tamp it down. Right now, there's another part of Chicago. Let's just say it's the area around the university, and there's a bunch of trouble brewing over there. But the truth of it is that all hell hasn't broken loose over there. In other words, the West Bank didn't produce October 7th. There have been episodic terrorist attacks, but by and large, not of the same scale. So I think the Trump view is this. The last thing we want to do is open up a new front in the West Bank and essentially unloose the West Bank. So you're now dealing with two separate problems. You have Gaza over here in the south, and now you're dealing with a West Bank intifada or uprising right in the middle of Israel. So I think the Trump view is all right. It's like one of those things where you're like, hold things over here. Let's just keep it the way it is. Let's not like try to rile things up. Let's see if we can sort of pacify the Gaza situation. Let's get that under control. Let's at least offer those people like, apartments and clean streets and safe streets and the possibility of a job and they might say no. They might reject it, but at least let's give it a try. And then we can deal with some of these larger issues. So I think for Trump, it is really the fear that the whole thing can come undone if through some provocation things are stirred up in a massive way in what is called the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. I think that's all it is. It's not some philosophical reflection that says, in effect, the West Bank doesn't really belong to Israel. Because to me, you can't really annex your own country. It's kind of dumb. So the whole concept of annexation itself makes no sense. What we're really talking about is how should these a majority Palestinian or majority Arab areas inside of Israel, how should they be politically administered at the local level?
Yeah. Um, I want to ask about, and I know we have not that much more time left, but I want to ask about the American left. So we are about, where I grew up, New York City is about to elect, it seems to me like 90+% sure at this point, a communist Islamist. I mean, it's a little bit weird, but he embodies that red-green alliance in himself. I think he's the biggest example in himself. You don't need to look at the protest and see the parts of it and see the two camps. He is the two camps. On the one hand, he'll be like pro-trans. On the other hand, he's from Uganda, taking pictures of people who hang trans people, of gay people, not just trans people in Uganda. So, and he's proud of both sides of it. And he's going to be the next mayor where my father and brother still live in New York as Jews. And I guess AOC is behind him and Bernie and all these other people. And they seem to be the rising forces of the American left. The Schumers, the Pelosi's are all dying out. They're older, they're more dry, they're not exciting. At least from Israel, that's the way it seems to me. How do you see it? Are we in for an AOC 2028?
I'm not sure about that, but I do think that Mamdani, who I think is to the left of AOC and to the left of even Ilhan Omar, my wife calls him a human Islamic victory arch. In the same way that you've got the Dome of the Rock sitting right on the holiest site in Judaism and Christianity, the Solomonic Temple. Mamdani is going to be a kind of victory arch over New York, right? A quarter century after 9/11. It's impossible to avoid the symbolism of that. And you are right. From the left's point of view, this is simply a rainbow coalition of ethnic constituencies. So you got the blacks over here, the Latinos over there, the feminists, the LGBTQ, and guess what? We got the radical jihadis. Yeah, come on over here, guys. You're in this section over here. Now, as you know well, better as well as I do, this is not a stable alliance long term. If it were to prevail, these people will start killing each other. But that's a long way ahead. That will only happen after they've gotten rid of the rest of us, because they are united in their hatred of us. I think that their recipe book has already been tried. It's been tried in smaller venues like Dearborn, Michigan. There's a guy very much like Mamdani. He's not as handsome as Mamdani, running in Minneapolis. He might win, Omar Fateh. And you can be sure that if they see some wins, particularly New York, a big prize, we're going to see the same thing then tried in a number of other, particularly the blue cities. It's harder to do in a red city, but most cities are in fact blue. So you can see this recipe beginning to expand. Whether it will reach the Democrats, I mean, Look, one of the silver linings of Mamdani for the Republicans is that Mamdani becomes an immediate millstone around the neck of the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party is well aware of this problem. So I don't think they would be reckless enough to have a Mamdani type be their presidential candidate. I don't think they would go there. They would be trying to downplay all that in the presidential election of 28. But I have made the larger point that if Sharia ever comes to America, it will look more like Mamdani, and I would add Tucker Carlson, than it would look like bin Laden or the Taliban. You're not going to see some ridiculous guy in a white robe and a 2 foot long beard. It's going to be some guys American born without a real accent who is cosmopolitan and did rap music and wears a bow tie and has pink cheeks. And so this is the threat to which I think Americans need to be made alert.
Yes, and but I would say that the just to maybe push back, the it seems that the base of the Democrat Party is where Mamdani is. It's not like the I think the establishment probably is scared for their lives about like losing generally, but I don't know how much you can fight the base. It's sort of like when Trump was running and the entire Republican establishment in the beginning tried to resist him. The base loved him. He won the primaries. It seems to me that might be the same type of thing. They tried it with Bernie and it worked the first time. I don't know if it'll work again. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, I think we should distinguish both on the Democratic side and the Republican side between the activists and the voters. So I agree. The progressive base, if you use base in that sense, the base of activists, the people who go door to door, that base is Mamdani-ish. It's more Mamdani than Schumer, that's for sure. Now, I don't think it's true of the ordinary Democratic voter, but it is true of the activist base. Similarly, on the Republican side, one of my concerns is that increasingly young people and young activists are becoming anti Israel, anti Jewish. But again, that should not be confused with the mainstream of Republican voters, who are, by the way, Reaganite. Are very much in the Reagan Trump tradition, and they are pro-Israel and pro-Jewish. Now, I think it is the goal of the Tuckers of the world to change that over time, and it is the goal of people like me to stop him.
Are you scared of in Europe? I have friends that moved to Israel, Jewish people from London, for example, from UK, London, um, because the demographics there are too scary. Meaning, you have, I think, 20% of London at this point is Islamic. You have areas that are no go for especially Jews. You have people being arrested for putting up posts that are pro Israel, but even not pro Israel, just political opinions. But in general, it's just the demographics are changing. Less and less naturally born Brits, more and more migrants, especially from countries that don't share Western values. And they have more kids than the original population, so to speak. And then the entire, values of the country change. I was just looking not too long ago about Dearborn, Michigan. It's a place where you, as of now, have the police uniform in Arabic. You have the calls to prayer in the morning at 5 a.m., waking up all of the citizens of the city. Yeah, it was, these are things that are, and the mayor is kicking people out because they're not Muslim, telling them you should leave is a big thing. So is that like something that you're scared that will be bigger in major American areas?
This is coming to America for sure. It's not here yet. It is here in small pockets. We see even glimpses of it in Texas, which is where I am. And you are right that the key to it is to shift the demographic balance. So in New York, Muslims are about 10%. Not enough right now to dominate the city by themselves. But if you look at the Mamdani vote and you break it down into foreign born New Yorkers versus native born New Yorkers, if it were native born New Yorkers alone, Mamdani would lose. But he wins decisively among the foreign born New Yorkers. And so you see the way here in which really this unrestricted immigration, and you can also see why the Democrats do it. This is the benefit they get out of it. This is the winning coalition that they're hoping to put together for the future. So I think that America is on notice that, in Europe, major cities have fallen to the Islamists. Suburban towns are being taken over one after the other. You've got like Muhammad is now like the mayor of like Liverpool. And so all of this, which is almost unimaginable to Americans. Why? Because really what you have is an illiberal force that is using the pathway of liberalism to produce an illiberal result. They don't ultimately believe in free speech. They don't believe in free assembly. They really believe in a hierarchical society structured by the caliphate. That's their agenda. So yes, this is a very real problem, and we should maybe we can have a further discussion about this on a subsequent occasion.
Can I ask you one last thing that I thought as you were talking about? You were born in India, and you spoke a little bit about in the beginning about that your story would be interesting in video, but I wanted to just ask you about India today. I know that it's a little bit off topic, but it has to do with Israel in the sense that India is a country that can be a bulwark for Israel against these tendencies that you just spoke of. Meaning, if in Western countries now Islam is rising, and that is the reason why Europe is so against us, and if this Mamdani type of Islam slash progressivism is rising in a lot of leftist American areas, then the Hindu-Jewish alliance with Christians along with us in India, they're a minority. But my point is, do you think, are you hopeful that this alliance can be cultivated by both sides? Because we both have what to gain from your home country, your country of birth, sorry.
Absolutely. And my family is part of a small Christian minority in India. The problem in India, and this is why I'm slightly ambivalent about the direction of India, is because the Modi government, by defining India as what they call the Hindutva, which is really Hindu dominated society, it scares all the minorities, including the Christians. Because if you have laws that essentially make Hindus into first class citizens and everybody else into a second class citizens, obviously the Christians don't want to be in that position either. We would rather see a Hindu majority government that identifies the threat of radical Islam and goes after it and draws on religious minorities. And by the way, there are many. There are other groups, the Sikhs, the Jains, and so on. There are other religious groups that would rally behind this, but they won't rally behind it if essentially you're making the point that India is for the Hindus and everybody else like doesn't belong. So this is nothing to do with Israel. This is simply an argument about how to create an effective kind of anti-Islamist coalition within India. But yes, that coalition would be a natural ally of Israel. And it also, by the way, would be a dominant majority in India. Right now, what thing Modi does is he pushes some of the other minorities into the camp of the opposition party, and thus he has a smaller coalition than he otherwise would have. Now, there are some sort of radical Hindus who have been, in some ways, I grant that they have been made fanatical by the Muslims, but they are like, no, Hindus have got to come first. They've got to get preferences for all government jobs. They need to be, only Hindus in the cabinet and so on. So Modi has to navigate this territory. Hey, it's not totally different from what Netanyahu deals with in Israel. I see you're kind of smiling. So there is a sort of analogy to it in India. But this is my own view of the best path forward.
Shalom, Israeli friends. I'm Nikos from the Ayn Rand Institute. For 2 years now, you have been told that your grief doesn't matter, that your struggle to survive is a, quote, genocide. And you've been told that you must sacrifice yourselves for those who wish to destroy you. So it's time we asked, what kind of ideas produce such poisonous views? What motivates those who stand with your wannabe destroyers? And I know something about all this, because for decades I used to believe those same anti-Israel myths. But some years ago I decided to focus on the truth instead. And since then I've been committed to fighting by your side. On December 19th, join me and a group of speakers who will make the case for Israel's right to exist more forcefully than you've ever heard before. Click the link to register. Remember, soldiers and students attend for free. See you in Tel Aviv.
Yes, and I think that just in general there should be um, just I'm a religious Jew, Orthodox. You're a Christian. We have we have to, especially in today's secular society, it's something that I've been talking about with a lot of my Christian friends. There's a sort of people don't understand how much it's critical for us to unite around the threat of one, secularism, and the Islamism uniting against people of faith. Because the people that are in the middle usually don't realize what's happening, and people who are religious, I'm just talking on a general basis. Obviously, a lot of people are, it doesn't fall for everyone, but we can see because we live it. And so I think on that point, just to end it off, how do you see cooperation between conservative Christians, conservative Jews, conservative Hindus? Do you think that it's possible even?
Well, I think it is the defining conflict of our time. And I just thought of something mildly clever. The way to oppose the Red Green Alliance is through the Saturday Sunday Alliance, which is to say the alliance between Jews, the Saturday people, and Christians, the Sunday people. And if we can create a political and a moral alliance, then we would represent the side of good against the forces of the dragon. Hey, before I leave, let me just mention the website for the film is thedragonsprophecyfilm.com. If you want to stream it, if you want to get DVDs, that's the way to check out the film. It's about all the stuff that we've been talking about. I made the film, it's a film that's timeless in a way because it deals with issues of the Bible and ancient battles and biblical prophecy, but it's also supremely timely. I mean, Tucker Carlson is in the film, and Ted Cruz, and a one-on-one with Netanyahu. So I think a good follow-up to our conversation is to just check out the film. We've had a lot of Jews who've seen the film, a lot of Christians, and both are equally enthusiastic in the way that this film is done. It is really a Christian film, but one that makes the moral argument for Israel and for the Jews.
And we'll put a link on the description of all the apps that we're going to put this conversation on. So, guys, just look up the description, click, and my highest recommendation. All of Dinesh's films are good, and this one is close to heart because I'm in Israel and it's about us, but not just about us, obviously, about the connection, about basically about everything we just spoke about. So I don't need to explain. Dinesh D'Souza, true pleasure speaking with you and meeting you in person. You are brave. We can see online. If everyone wants to see how much crap Dinesh is getting right now, go on to his X post, X tweet about this whole Tucker thing, and you'll really enjoy it or be scared. So you can see from there everything that he's taking on for doing the right thing. And so, Dinesh, pleasure talking to you. Pleasure having you on, and keep up the good fight.
I really appreciate it. Thank you. It is particularly the genius of evil and of the devil to invert a situation and put the good person into an impossible situation where you are forced to either surrender or mimic the evil that has been visited on you. And when you do the natural thing, which is out of indignation, you strike back, then you are seen as the perpetrator. So then there's a swapping of positions in which the original perpetrator, in this case Hamas and the Palestinians, become the victims, and Israel becomes the evildoer.